Okay, wonderful. Welcome, everybody. So good to see everyone. And we are going to just get started here momentarily. I see a lot of people are still joining, but we do want to be conscious of time because we pack a lot into these and do our best to stay under an hour since we know everybody's got a lot going on and we all spend a lot of time in Zoom land. So I just want to welcome you all today. I'm Betta Broad and I'm the campaign director of New Yorkers for Clean Power. And we're so excited to be here to talk about waste, specifically what New York State's climate plan needs to include. Now, waste is not a topic that we often zero in on New Yorkers for Clean Power. Typically, we're talking about heat pumps and solar and energy efficiency and electric vehicles. But we thought this would be an important topic to include. It's one of the top sources of greenhouse gas emissions, the waste sector. And many of you may have seen the excellent report about plastic being the new coal and the fossil fuel industry's big plans to scale up plastic. So we are so honored and delighted to have Judith Enck, who is a powerhouse, the president of Beyond Plastics here, and of course, Jen Metzger, our own senior policy advisor at New Yorkers for Clean Power and former state senator. And I should say Judith also has a previous life as the EPA Regional Administrator. So both of these incredibly brilliant, powerful women have also served in government and now are pushing on all of the policies that we need to scale up clean energy and sustainability and make our planet viable for future generations. So, so glad that we're all here to have this conversation. Wonderful to see all of you. And I think we are going to ask people to wait to put, actually, Jen, do you have a preference with questions in the chat? I know Judith would prefer we wait till the end, but I know Jen's going to be presenting first on the scoping plan specifically. And I didn't know whether you would like people to enter your questions in the chat or you would prefer
we might as well just say it, just to be consistent. We save them all for the end. After the presentations, just post your questions in chat. You can also raise your hand for the discussion.
Okay, sounds good. So usually we put our questions in as we're going, but if you can just, scribble down your questions so you don't forget it the old fashioned way, and we'll get to it at the end, or you can raise your hand. So, and please feel free to put your intro, who you are in the chat. Great to be, with you and building this community of New Yorkers that are concerned and want to take action. So I will pass it off to Jen Metzger and you can share your slides, Jen, and we'll get going to learn about waste in the scoping plan and what we can do about it.
Great. Thanks so much, Betta. I'm going to start off with some background on the scoping plan before we dive into the recommendations on waste and plastic specifically. The draft scoping plan, for those who don't know, is the plan to reach our emissions and equity goals under New York's Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, our climate law that was passed in 2019. The plan is really where the rubber hits the road. We can't reach those goals without a strong and realistic plan. And that the draft plan is open for public comment right now through June 10th. 2 hearings have been held already. There's another hearing tonight in Binghamton, another in Albany on Thursday, and more to come. And I just, want to kind of mention at the outset that the fossil fuel industry is funding a huge, really massive misinformation campaign about the scoping plan. It's under the guise of New Yorkers for Affordable Energy. If you see, information coming out of that organization, no, it is the fossil fuel industry and its allies. And it's really important to get, real information out about the scoping plan and make sure that we have, high levels of public engagement in this process. It's really critical. So today we're going to be focusing on, the plan is 330 pages. We're focusing on one chapter, waste. And but I do want to say that we have on the New Yorkers for Clean Power website, we have a toolkit. Betta, maybe we could put in the chat the link to the toolkit on the broad plan and guidelines for public comment, and basically how you can get involved in that process. So I'm going to just share my screen. Give me 1 second. All right, this was that exciting day on the Senate stairs when we were about to pass the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. Okay, so as I mentioned, the draft scoping plan is the plan for meeting the Climate Act's goals. These include reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by 2030 below 1990 levels and achieving net zero emissions by 2050. We have to be generating 70% of our electricity from renewable sources by 2030 and achieving a carbon-free, fossil fuel-free electricity system by 2040. And we have to ensure, importantly, a just and equitable transition. And the law requires that we dedicate at least 35% with the goal of 40% of the benefits of clean energy investments to disadvantaged communities. The scoping plan is extremely important because it's going to shape state legislation, regulation, and decision-making for every state agency and department for years to come. This past weekend, I was at a Climate Reality Project event with Senator Pete Harckham, and he was asked about whether a particular bill would be passed, and his response was, we want to see, what's in the scoping plan. So, this is what decision makers are going to be looking to. The plan was developed by a 22-member Climate Action Council established under the climate law. It includes all of the heads of the relevant state agencies and departments, as well as 10 appointed members that include a mix of environmental and climate justice advocates, industry representatives, and scientists. The council's work was informed by the recommendations of 7 advisory panels with expertise in different areas. There was an advisory panel on waste, for instance, as well as the Climate Justice Working Group and the Just Transition Working Group, which were established under the law. The plan was approved, the draft plan was approved by the Climate Action Council in December for public comment. As I said, that public comment period runs through June 10th, I should say. Then, the council will review those public comments and revise the plan. It has to be finalized by December 31st of this year. As you can see from the contents in this slide, the plan is sweeping in scope, and meeting the state's emissions goals is really going to require transformational changes in every sector, including how we deal with waste. So I can't emphasize enough how important it is to sign up and speak at a public hearing, whether in person or virtual. And submit written comments too. You can get into more specifics in written comments than you have time for in a public hearing. I think they're only allowing 2 minutes for speaking at public hearings. So we're really trying to encourage people to do both. So this pie chart is from the scoping plan and is based on the most up-to-date greenhouse gas emissions inventory for New York. And as you can see, waste accounts for 12% of emissions, and this includes emissions from municipal solid waste management and wastewater treatment. Of that 12%, the biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions comes from landfills, although waste incineration emits all kinds of harmful pollutants damaging to our health, particularly in disadvantaged communities where those facilities tend to be sited. Landfill emissions are emissions of methane generated by the breakdown of organic waste in an anaerobic environment. This is food waste, yard clippings, that kind of thing. As a greenhouse gas, methane is 84 times more potent than carbon dioxide over a 20-year period. All of the modeling that was done for the scoping plan to reach the state's climate goals, in all scenarios, it requires that 100% of our organic waste be diverted from landfills by 2030. So those are major changes we have to make between now and then. Looking at the composition of New York's municipal solid waste, organics waste makes up about 1/4 of the waste that's disposed of. Paper and plastics are make up a large shares of New York's municipal solid waste as well. The sheer volume of what we throw away is unsustainable. It's an average of 5 pounds per person per day. Only 18% of the waste in New York is recycled. The vast majority of it ends up in landfills or is incinerated, either in-state or exported. When looking at emissions from waste, that it's not enough to just look at the end use of emissions. The state's greenhouse gas emissions analysis doesn't really tell the whole story. As the scoping plan recognizes, the most significant emissions impact is not from disposal, but from production of products and packaging that becomes waste. Judith Enck's organization, Beyond Plastic, produced a really kind of eye-popping report that I refer to often on the greenhouse gas emissions from the US plastics industry, which I'm sure she'll talk about in this later today. So I'm going to just review some of the key scoping plan recommendations in summary form, and then we can kind of dissect them. There are a number of recommendations to address organic waste because of its contributions to methane emissions, as I mentioned. One of these is to strengthen New York's food donation and food scraps recycling law, which we passed when I was in the Senate and actually just went into effect this year, but really needs to be more aggressive to meet our climate goals. Another plan recommendation is to require a per ton surcharge on all waste to better encourage reduction, reuse, and recycling, and also to help fund programs to support these programs and practices. Other key recommendations on organics focus on expanding assistance for local organics recycling infrastructure, requiring food scraps recovery as part of local solid waste management planning, expanding organics collection programs, and developing markets for compost and encouraging its use as a soil amendment. Compost is hugely beneficial to soil health and improving the capacity of the soils to sequester carbon, along with a host of other environmental benefits. The scoping plan also recommends a broad set of policies to reduce waste, including enacting extended producer responsibility programs, which we'll be talking about today, comprehensive textile waste reduction and recycling, and a number of measures that would tackle the scourge of single-use plastics and packaging waste. The scoping plan also includes recommendations to strengthen laws, regulations, and incentives to encourage and support recycling, including expanding deposit container programs, requiring minimum post-consumer recycled content in products and packaging, developing state procurement standards for recyclable products, and creating tax credits to attract recycling industries to New York. So that was sort of like the real kind of quick and dirty broad overview of what the plan includes. What we want to talk about today is, what are the key recommendations to focus on in public comments? What's missing from this plan? And how can the recommendations be strengthened in the final scoping plan to be adopted in December? We are very fortunate to have with us today a leading expert on this subject, Judith Enck, who hardly needs any introduction, but I'll give one anyway. Judith is founder and president of Beyond Plastics, which is dedicated to ending plastic pollution through education, advocacy, and institutional change. She also teaches classes on plastics pollution as senior fellow and visiting faculty member at Bennington College. And she, as Betta mentioned, she's held influential positions in federal and state government, including as our EPA Regional Administrator under President Obama, and as New York's You were, I believe, Deputy Secretary of the Environment in the Governor's Office, as well as Policy Advisor to the New York State Attorney General. So Judith, thanks for joining us today. I'm going to turn it over to you to get your assessment on what we need to do in this scoping plan.
Thank you, Jen and Betta. It's really exciting to be with you, and what a die-hard group. 74 of you spending your lunch talking about waste. It doesn't get any better. Let me quickly share my screen, and there. So that's who I am, Judith Enck. I'm the president of Beyond Plastics. Go to our website when I'm done, not now. If you zone out, here are the three major things I'm going to talk to you about today. One is plastics is a climate change issue, so we have to reduce the production, use, and disposal of plastic. So that could be one thing you put in your public comments, on your scoping comments, and also verbalize when you show up at the hearings. My second recommendation is that we ban yard waste and food waste from landfills and incinerators. That's how you get composting programs growing. And my third recommendation is that we shut down garbage incinerators in New York. Bill McKibben recently said we have to stop burning things. That includes fossil fuel, forests, and waste. And New York currently has 10 operating garbage incinerators, and they are a major source of greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, burning solid waste emits more greenhouse gas per kilowatt hour than any other energy source. So my third recommendation on comments here would be to shut down incinerators. There is a lot going on in the world. Energy is in the middle of geopolitical struggles. Our hearts break for what's unfolding in Ukraine. If Putin didn't control so much oil and gas in Russia, he wouldn't have the money to do terrible things like invading sovereign countries. And I think your work is so important because it reminds us that there is vast public interest in protecting the environment. This is a photo of Earth Day over 40 years ago. And what's motivating a lot of the folks back then continue to motivate people today. So here's the fundamental problem and why I've spent the better part of my career working on waste issues. The US has 4% of the world's population. We use 17% of the world's energy. We gobble up about a quarter of the world's natural resources. And then not surprisingly, the US generates about 12% of the world's solid waste. And that simply is not sustainable. So I used to work for this guy, no drama Obama, miss him, and spent a lot of time all over my region talking about climate change and waste issues. And what I'm excited about is finally a recognition of the connection between waste, plastics in particular, and climate change. And it comes at a critical moment because plastic waste generation and disposal is on the increase, as you can see from this chart. At the same time, our planet is warming at an incredible rate with immense catastrophic resources. We know that climate change does not cause hurricanes, but it makes hurricanes much more intense because of the warm water temperature in the sea or the ocean. Part of my EPA region was Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands. And because of climate change, a Category 2 hurricane becomes a Category 4 hurricane. And I'm sure you all remember Hurricane Maria and everything that went with that, almost a year without power in Puerto Rico. There's now a focus on wildfires. This is in Australia, but certainly the Western United States is an issue. The new coal. So take a look at this report, which is on our website. It was quite an effort. And what we did was look at the 10 distinct ways that greenhouse gases are released from plastic production, use, and disposal, and concluded that greenhouse gas emissions from plastic production will soon exceed greenhouse gas emissions from coal plants, because coal plants are closing at a rapid rate in New York and nationwide, thanks to all of you. And those emissions are being replaced by emissions from plastic production. So what's actually happening is the fossil fuel industry knows that they're losing market share in electricity generation because we're shifting more to energy efficiency, renewables, heat pumps, and on the transportation sector, a greater shift toward electric vehicles, electrification in general. So the petrochemical industry has made a big bet on plastic production. So now how do I go to the next slide that I'm in now that I'm here? Who's going to tell me how to do that?
If you just click on the slide, it should go to the next one.
So that is what I just said. Same thing. So plastic production is the plan B for the fossil fuel industry. And I'm going to end on this slide, but I want to explain why I have a picture of the amazing Sharon Levine up. Sharon lives in St. James Parish in Louisiana, where a company called Formosa, a company out of Taiwan, wants to build 2 ethane crackers. And let me briefly explain what an ethane cracker is. You all know about hydrofracking. So you know at the fracked pad, currently most ethane is vented directly into the environment, a very potent greenhouse gas, as Jen mentioned. There are now proposals, mostly in Texas, Louisiana, and Pennsylvania, to build new pipelines from the fracked gas pads, send the ethane gas via pipeline to a new facility called an ethane cracker. It's a funny name, but it's a multi-billion-dollar operation where the gas is heated at a very high temperature and cracked, thus the name ethane cracker, only to produce single-use plastic pellets. So either powder or little plastic pellets or nurdles that are used to make plastic packaging. The greenhouse gas emissions from these facilities are immense. And so that is why my major recommendation for this document is we need to reduce the generation, use, and disposal of plastics. My second recommendation deals with yard waste and food waste. When you've got rotting food or yard waste, it emits a lot of methane. And it's always been maddening to me that we are filling up landfills with yard waste and food waste. If we can pull that out, you dramatically reduce methane emissions, and you can use that as a soil amendment. So for 40 years, we've been waiting for composting to get a footing. I think from a policy perspective, the way you see composting really take off is when you ban yard waste and food waste from incinerators and landfills. That is the law in the state of Vermont. You start with the large generators, like is happening in New York, university cafeterias, restaurants, etc. And you will see the end markets emerge, and you've got the double benefit of soil health. I would direct you to something called the Marin Carbon Project out in Marin, California, where they are applying amounts of municipal compost to soil, and you get the triple benefit that it is a carbon sink. And soil experts will debate how many inches you apply. And I'm not going to enter that brutal debate, whether it's 2 inches or 3 inches or more. I'm just supporting the idea that we have clean, source separated, not sludge, yard waste and food waste, keep it source separated, keep it clean, and apply it to soil. And then you're not going to get the tremendous methane emissions at landfills. Then my third major recommendation has to do with garbage incineration. Burning garbage is not compatible with climate change concerns. When you burn garbage, you get a significant amount of air toxins. You get lead, you get mercury, you get dioxin that is formed by the combustion process. Dioxin, one of the most toxic materials known in science. You also get a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. And as I mentioned earlier, if you're just looking at how much kilowatt hour of energy is generated, much more greenhouse gas emissions from garbage burning than even burning coal. New York has the second largest number of operating garbage incinerators in the whole country. Number 1 is Florida, followed by New York. We have 10 large incinerators. They're old. There has not been a new incinerator sited in New York for many years for good reason. They're almost always cited in environmental justice communities. Incineration does not eliminate the need for landfills. For every ton of garbage that you burn, you get about 1/3 of ash that needs to be disposed of, and the fly ash is very toxic. It's also very expensive. So I don't understand how New York DEC can put out a climate action plan and not recommend shutting down garbage incinerators. I take issue with the statistic that only 7% of greenhouse gas emissions come from incinerators. That is not accurate. I can't give you a percentage because the DEC rarely monitors the stacks from these garbage incinerators. So again, burning solid waste is antithetical to a serious climate change agenda. We can really get serious about waste reduction, recycling, composting, maximize those 3 strategies, and then you're going to have a small, hopefully municipally owned landfill. You do everything you can not to fill it up. Key to reducing waste is passing a law called Extended Producer Responsibility, or EPR. It doesn't roll off the tongue. The concept of EPR is really good. Companies that make packaging and paper should take the financial responsibility to deal with it after the fact. The key thing with EPR, though, is we absolutely have to get the details right. And unfortunately, Governor Hochul proposed a budget bill in the most recent budget on EPR, which Beyond Plastics and about 160 other organizations opposed because it did not include key elements to make EPR effective. And I just want to quickly walk through them and tell you that very soon, Assemblymember Stephen Engelbright, chair of the Assembly ENCON committee, will be introducing an EPR bill in the state legislature that has these key provisions. Number 1, an EPR bill should reduce packaging. And it shouldn't just be aspirational. You need to have specific goals and dates, just like you got in the climate law. We want to see 50% reduction in packaging over 10 years. And then the packaging that's left should be made from recycled content or be easily recyclable. So rates and dates in the law, you don't leave it to the packaging industry to decide if they're going to use recycled content, if they're going to reduce. You wouldn't expect the tobacco industry to develop a plan to reduce smoking Why would we expect the packaging industry to develop a packaging reduction plan? Second key element is eliminating toxics from packaging. Third, expanding the very successful New York Bottle Bill to cover non-carbonated beverages and to increase the deposit to a dime. Technically, we want to do the bottle bill in a separate bill, and so it can move together. Fourth, no burning of plastics. And it's not just no burning of plastic in municipal incinerators, but plastic recycling has been an abysmal failure. Even though the plastics industry has been telling us for decades that we can just put all our plastics in the recycling bin, only 8.5% of plastics actually get recycled. So the plastics industry is finally admitting that significant failure. So what's their new bright idea? Burning the plastics at facilities called chemical recycling facilities. Unfortunately, Governor Hochul's bill would have allowed the burning of plastic at chemical recycling facilities. Assemblymember Engelbright's bill will prohibit that. And then the final two elements, one is if you're going to set up something called a PRO, a producer responsibility organization, you need strong oversight and accountability. And then finally, we do want to see taxpayer relief. We want local governments getting financial support for recycling and reduction. So it's not just recycling, it's reducing waste as well. What would that look like? For instance, how about giving school districts money to install dishwashing equipment? So at lunchtime, students are served on real dishes rather than single-use disposables. How about installing public water refill stations in every public facility, every train station, every main street? Why should we waste money buying bottled water in plastic water bottles? Let's have free water. It used to be water fountains. It could be new water fountains. It could be refill stations. We've got a bunch of ideas on how to build that reduction, reuse, refill infrastructure. That needs to be a requirement in a strong EPR bill. I could go on and on about EPR, but you all seem like lovely people, so I will stop. Keep an eye on this on the Beyond Plastics website. You can sign up for free emails. We'll let you know when bills are moving, when policies are moving. But everything I just talked about is essentially touched on in the climate plan. So I hope this has kind of helped steer you in the direction for your public comments, whether they're written or verbal or both. And I think I will end there so we have time for questions. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Judith. That was fantastic. I learned a lot. I think everybody did from both you and Jen. This is not a topic that New Yorkers for Clean Power typically focuses on. So a lot of that was new information for me. And many of you I'm seeing in the chat are experts in this or have a lot of opinions, which is great. Hopefully that wasn't too distracting though, Judith. I know we told people to save their questions for the end. So if you have patiently waited with your question, please throw it into the chat or raise your hand. And we can call on you. I also just want to give a plug since we often, start losing people right at the end, that New Yorkers for Clean Power is offering to send you a free to go wear kit if you send us your comment, or you can BCC me, if you send it in or just forward it so we know that you did, and we're happy to send you this if you give us your mailing address. It has a fork and a spoon and chopsticks and is great to just keep in your bag. You all probably have one, but if not, we're happy to send you one, and it has our little NYCP logo on it. And I don't plan on mailing this to you, but I did just want to give a little plug. I have one of these. I finally started composting. It was like a, eco ambition of mine. And last year I finally got, the thing in the backyard. And I keep this on my counter in my fridge, and it really is effortless. You know, if you have a backyard and or a place that you can throw it. So, and of course, there should be places like they have in New York City where you can just drop it off, but at the farmers markets, but not every town is lucky enough to have that. So anyway, just wanted to give a brief plug for both of those things, and just, you know, once again, the importance of taking action with this climate action plan and letting your voice be heard on these important issues. And we're happy to incentivize you a little bit to do that. So, okay, I see Ron has his hand up. So Ron, I will call on you to ask your question. Are you unmuted? Hold on. Oh, unmute. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Good.
Okay.
Good to see all of you, and especially Judith. Thank you so much, Judith. You did a great job as usual. So I went and testified at one of these meetings in Long Island, and it was a very interesting experience because I walked into a meeting expecting 20 people and noticed that 300 union workers were bussed in, who proceeded to boo everyone that said anything that was positive about the environment. So ignoring that, my one comment really has to do with low-hanging fruit, which I'm talking about. And the low-hanging fruit I'm talking about is methane. And I think that alone would be a big contribution in terms of reforming fundamental problems having to do with landfills. We need to fix it. We need to stop ignoring it. We need to fix it.
So are you suggesting methane recovery facilities at existing landfills?
Well, there are methane recovery systems at existing landfills, which are leaking to the extent that they're probably 70% underreported, the leaks that are coming out of these things. So the fundamental reform is stopping the use of.
Oops, you froze up.
Second fundamental reform is taking a look at every single landfill there is in the state. There are 17 on Long Island that are illegally closed. There are a lot of illegally closed landfills throughout the state. And then also look at the landfills that we're using right this second in New York State, the two of them, that are leaking dangerous fluids that are contaminating the groundwater. We just have to stop doing the bad things. We know how to fix it. We're not fixing it. So let's fix it.
Sounds good. You're right. We do know how to fix it.
Okay, there you go. We're all in agreement. Okay, I see Sarah from 350 Brooklyn. Sarah, what's your question?
There we go. You know, this rates and dates, right? Qualities mandate is great, of course, but it needs to be enforced. My understanding is that the plastic bags bill that we passed, what, a year ago, 2 years ago, is very erratically adhered to all over the state. And that's because there's no money for enforcement. Can you speak to a little bit about how we pay for that?
Sure. Yeah, so on the plastic bag ban, which finally took effect last March, Sarah, you'll be happy to know most stores are complying and are not handing out single-use plastic bags. We've documented with an amazing volunteer from Beyond Plastics New York City over 100 stores that are violating and are still handing out plastic bags. And here's the dilemma. Our volunteer documents it. He goes to the store, he takes a picture, he sends it to the email that the DEC, Department of Environmental Conservation, has established. And then the DEC, as far as we know, does virtually nothing with these complaints. This is not hard to enforce. Either you're handing out plastic bags at the checkout or you're not. So we are not giving up. We are continuing to write to the DEC, the Attorney General's office, but you should know that most stores are complying. And when it comes to extended producer responsibility, The rates and the dates are important. And what this means is you have to, what we want to see is environmental standards for packaging. So think about fuel efficiency standards for cars, appliance efficiency standards for your refrigerator or your stove. Take that concept and use it for packaging. Unfortunately, the way the governor's budget bill was drafted on EPR, that there was no requirement for reduction. And in terms of recycled content or recyclability, that decision was left to an industry-dominated advisory committee to possibly make a recommendation to the DEC on, and then the DEC would have to do regulations. I don't have confidence in that process, and I'm pretty persistent. I'll stick with something for years. I want a packaging law, me, I'm so greedy. I want a packaging law that actually reduces packaging. The statute, just like you got in your climate law, this % reduction by this date. And if you don't comply, you don't get to sell your product in New York. So if you're trying to sell something that does not meet the statutory requirements, then we do need an enforcement mechanism to make sure that the product isn't sold. And we do have to pay attention to enforcement, but we're going to get much more compliance that way when you have clear requirements in the statute. Industry tells us all the time, oh, we don't mind new requirements. Just tell us what the goal is and let us get there and give us enough time. So that's what we are trying to do in EPR. Someone had a question about chemical recycling, if I could tackle that for a moment. Chemical recycling is basically plastic burning. You take all of the mixed plastic, you heat it at a very high temperature, and then theoretically, you try to make new plastic. But in the rare instance where this is actually happening in the United States, which is only at like 8 facilities, they're burning plastic to create new low-grade fossil fuel, not new plastic. One of the major problems with chemical recycling is it doesn't work. A second major problem is these facilities generate a huge amount of hazardous waste. They release air pollutants. They are almost always cited in low-income communities or communities of color. There's an excellent short report out by the NRDC on this called Recycling Lies. They also don't exist without massive public subsidy. So there's a company named Brightmark that's been trying to build these facilities around the country, and they've said that they want to build a chemical recycling facility in central New York. If you're from central New York, we're going to need your help on this. Brightmark wanted to build a $680 million plastic facility. They call it a plastic renewal plant. And they wanted $500 million in government bonds for the $680 million plastic facility. And just a day or two ago, the people of Macon, Georgia said no to that. So the American Chemistry Council is pushing this hard. They call it advanced recycling. They call it chemical recycling. They call it gasification. They call it pyrolysis. Pyrolysis, P-Y-R-O, okay? It's burning. And Beyond Plastics will oppose these facilities wherever they're proposed. And there are bills in the state legislature that would exempt these facilities from the state's solid waste laws and recycling laws, introduced by Senator Mannion, a Democrat from Syracuse, and Assemblywoman Hindeman. I may be saying her name wrong. She is from either Nassau County or Queens. And so we see the American Chemistry Council all over the country promoting these facilities, and then at the same time trying to pass state laws to exempt these facilities from different environmental laws and to get massive state taxpayer subsidies. So that's not the road we want to go down.
Judith, I wanted to just bring, there's a question in the chat from Jacqueline Ebner. What do the speakers think about the tension between an expanded bottle bill and loss of funds to MRFs? We know that a higher fee expanded bottle bill will work. How can we get private investment into the recycling market, like collection services, innovative redemption centers into this space versus municipalities? I think that's a good question.
Yeah, so I think expanding the bottle bill makes a lot of sense. You get a much higher recycling rate when there's a deposit on the container than when it's just tossed into your curbside recycling program. So increasing the deposit to $0.10 and expanding the bottle bill to non-carbonated beverages makes a lot of sense. I would like to see more support for innovative redemption centers. There's one nonprofit redemption center in New York City called Sure We Can. And we worked closely with them on bottle bill expansion and trying to get a strong EPR. I think particularly in New York City, we need to see that. The MRFs are gonna have a lot of material. Unfortunately, we're getting nowhere on reduction. And some of the material recovery facilities or the MRFs say, well, you can take the glass, but we want the aluminum. That's not going to work because you can't have deposits based on the material. It's either you have it on non-carbonated beverages or you don't. The added benefit of the bottle bill is the litter prevention. So, you know, I understand the MRF concerns. I think they really need to acknowledge you get a much higher recycling rate with deposits. And there's enough recyclables to go around. I want to emphasize, though, my focus is not on recycling. It's on waste reduction. That's the top rung of the hierarchy, right? Reduction, and then recycle, then bury and burn. But the hierarchy has been flipped upside down. And I am really tired of waiting for good policies on reduction. That's what strong EPR needs to require, is reduction. Because like recycling of plastics doesn't help us when you have an 8.5% recycling rate of plastic. We need to reduce the use of plastics.
And Judith, is there something happening at the federal level also around the environmental standards for packaging? It seems like if we're, I mean, not to say that it isn't important to take whatever action we can at the state level, but if we're really going to move the needle on this and address the industry's expansion, doesn't it need to happen federally?
Yes, but it won't, because the plastics industry, I mean, when you work on plastics, you're taking on the fossil fuel industry and the chemical industry, and they have a stranglehold on Congress. So we're going to see progress at the state level. We will see some strong state level EPR bills if we are successful, and then that'll trickle up to the federal level. There is a federal bill called the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, which is very important. It does things like ban plastic bags, national bottle bill, and on extended producer responsibility, it basically tells EPA to go figure it out. So I would have liked to see a little bit more detail, but it's a good bill. It's House Bill 2238, US Senate Bill 984, which I strongly support. And we have not all, but most New York House members on as co-sponsors. And I think Senator Gillibrand is a co-sponsor. So I totally love that bill. I support it. It's not likely to pass anytime soon. So we need state level bills. We also need to be aware that the packaging industry is promoting their own weak EPR bills. They know that the public wants to see action on packaging reduction, particularly plastics. The national group Oceana commissioned a poll by Ipsos. 81% of American voters want plastic reduction at the local, state, and federal level. And the neat thing about this poll is the response was bipartisan. is Republicans and Democrats alike. You all need to deal with climate change deniers. I've never met a plastic pollution denier because the plastic pollution is everywhere. It's in trees, it's in rivers, it's on the side of the road. So we need to really build that political support for good policies, which is what we're doing at Beyond Plastics. And just a little commercial, we're in the process of setting up local groups and affiliates for Beyond Plastics. We're tiny, but we've dedicated 2 of our staff to work on helping to build the grassroots movement against plastic pollution. And that's how we're going to win this thing, from the bottom up.
Absolutely.
I also, just wanted to mention that, there have been bills, I introduced some when I was in there with Pat Fahey. There are some bills in the state Senate now to reduce single-use plastics, encourage reuse, by request only for plastic straws and that kind of thing. Like there are other pieces of legislation that we really need to move forward at the state level. And I completely agree. It's reduce, reduce, reduce. We also need to encourage recycled content in products as well. That's really key in getting. I know it's an important part of EPR, but that question about how do we expand markets? We have to require that products and packaging be made with recycled, post-consumer recycled content. So just and we can do a lot through state procurement standards. We shouldn't be procuring, it used to drive me crazy in the state Senate. I actually got it was so much single-use plastic when I came in just in the Senate lounge. I was like, get rid of this stuff, which I actually did move toward compostable paper products and not single-use plastics. But yeah, the state and federal government both have an incredible amount of power over markets through their purchase power, and a lot can be done to create markets by utilizing that power.
Totally agree. The way the paper, the way the recycled paper industry really took off was when Bill Clinton was president and said that the federal government would use a certain percentage of post-consumer recycled content paper. That totally changed the world on recycled paper. One executive order. So, the state government should lead by example and is moving in some very good directions. There's an executive order that does require less toxic products and more of an emphasis on reduction. The DEC is doing a pretty decent job on that. We just would like to see, the state not buying single-use plastics.
Absolutely. So there are so many great questions left. I love our people across the state who are so passionate, and all of you have excellent points and questions. And I know we're running out of time, so I just want to mention that we're going to save the chat as we often do, and put it in a Google Doc, and we will ask Judith if you don't mind to answer the questions that we're running out of time for, and then we'll circulate those to the group. We'll also, and Jen, there's some questions here about the scoping plan and how to participate, and a couple of questions I saw from Emily Hauser about the circular economy and including that more, and kind of cross-cutting issues. So we'll be sure to save all of these excellent questions and points and get your questions answered, and also follow up with you with the slides and the recording and a way to get to go where, the details about that if you're interested, and of course to stay connected with Judith and Beyond Plastics, perhaps becoming an affiliate That sounds like a great way to take action. But, we're so excited to be able to feature, what we can do about waste in New York. New Yorkers for Clean Power wants to support you in this effort. And I don't know if we have time for one more question. Judith, Jen, you want to
let's take one more question. And I also just want to mention, we have a guide, a public comment guide on plastics and waste. I'm sharing the link to that. I'm fairly sure it's consistent with everything Judith said.
It is.
But so if there's one more question, Betta, do you want to take?
There are so many good questions. The pressure. Let's see.
There's one on single stream versus, that's always a topic that really gets me going. Single stream versus multi-stream recycling. I don't know if you want to talk to that, Judith.
Oh yeah, what a big mistake going to single stream recycling. We never should have let it happen. I look back and I regret it. And no one ever asked us. The haulers just did it. And the Solid Waste Management Act of 1988 required mandatory source separation, but didn't put a finer point on it altogether or separate. And I think shifting to single stream was a huge mistake. And if you are active at the local level, if you can get back to dual stream, the more source separation you do, the cleaner it's going to be, and the better situation you're going to have attracting lucrative markets. And this is something you can really work at the local level.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you so much, Judith, for joining us, and
Sure.
And all of you for joining us. And we'll be following up with answers to some of these questions, as well as the slides from both presentations. And we encourage you to please check out our toolkit on the website for participating in the public comment process and the scoping plan. As I said, this is where the rubber hits the road. So if we want to meet those climate goals, we need a strong plan to get there. So thank you.
It's happen. It's up to us. Thanks, everybody.